will start with session 3. And although I agree with Antoine Découvue, there's no one size fits all, and that everything is situational. Nevertheless, there are still cross-border matters to attend to with regard to no net land take. When I travel by train to Luxembourg City, I always have to change it at Arlon in the Walloon region. And it strikes me that so many people are apparently commuting between the Walloon region and Luxembourg City in the morning and in the evening. So that is apparently still going on here. So you can't deal with no land take alone in Luxembourg, but you have to take care about your surrounding regions. Therefore, we have now a session with Michel Dachelet and Rene van der Lecq, and also with Bob Wealer, who has already spoken here at this meeting. And I would like to focus on the last 2 questions of the pre-event brief, because I think we have already dealt with what are the experience in the other countries and how does the situation in Luxembourg link to that. I would like to focus more or less this roundtable of about which spatial strategies, instruments, and mechanism we have in this realm, and how can a no-net land take target be combined with the urgent need to build more housing, considering the demand for housing. So I would like to give first the words to Michel Dachelet, Inspector General of the Department de l'Aménagement du Territoire et de l'Urbanisme of the Walloon region, to hear his views about this. Michel, you have the floor. Are you there?
Okay, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je voudrais savoir combien de temps.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to know how much time I've got.
You have 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, merci.
Right, thank you. First some elements of background. We are going to look at the figures. In the 90s, we consumed 13 square kilometers a year. We've gone down to 9 today. So it's good news. We are going in the right direction, but on the other hand, it's bad news because it's not on purpose. So if the number of kilometers has been reduced, it's not by public action, but because of the aging of the population, except the Brabant-Wallon region, for which the sectorial plans, regional plans that my colleague talked about before, locks the use of the territory. So there's only one place where it's a policy that is 30 years old that's had an impact on land use. So let me take some elements to relocate the action of the region in link with the new legislation. In terms of land use, it was the center of action that the government wanted to put in place to reduce land take by 2050, but acting directly with the ambition of having a threshold in 2025. To do that, they put in place an experts group in charge of setting or defining methods, how to gather, and to identify as from which tools the action could be the most efficient. So what will the experts say? First, they're going to look at the Fetier tool, a strategic tool. Right, well, mentioning all of its qualities, the tool has just been used, well, 3 years ago, but has not been implemented. So what has been put in light by the experts is that The scheme in question aims at that same objective, zero land take by 2050, but they put in light its limitations. The first is that there's no intermediary target, so you can continue using the land as everybody does now, and making that leap in 2050. The pivotal elements of the thinking around land take, that's around the definition of what on the urban and rural centers that should be determined. There's no indication about that. And the SDT, just ignores all measures to be implemented at all levels. And it doesn't say how to use tools. So more precisely, what's come out of the experts' work? First thing is that there's not enough targets at the regional level. How do you get to know land take? One of the first difficulties we've got with this lack of specification is that we can't monitor the action because we don't know in which direction we're going. So we can't say for this or that actions, well, is it positive or should we put in place something else? Than the monitoring of the trend. It was also raised by the Luxembourg colleagues and the colleague from Flanders, is that the de-zoning, well, basically the removal of the capacity to build in certain areas is very much unpopular with some part of the population, but it's also very costly for the region. So in the proposals made, well, the thing is not to use this, at least not in the beginning. Another element that's been raised is that the supracommunality, at least in the way it's managed in the Wallon region, is too heavy, and it requires too much consultations in large at the communal level in large territories. Fourth point, and that's been raised also this morning, that's issues about the autonomy of municipalities with the logic of subsidiarity. Until which point the municipality is the body that is the best fit to make decisions in terms of granting building permits, for example. The other element is communal planning that's been used since World War II. And that's been relaunched with the decentralization. It's obsolete, and it makes legitimate urban expansion and land take. Last point, and it was talked about also this morning, is the need to clear up concepts when we talk about land take, consumption, soil sealing. It's got to be cleared up. In the tools that have been put on table by that experts group, there are two that are of a strategic nature. The first is they acknowledge that Wallonie is composed of urban regions that are interconnected with more rural areas in a multipolar logic. The approach that's been taken is, well, not to leave anybody aside, not to leave any territory aside. So what is the lowest level in order not to have a dichotomy in the territory, well, between strengthening the urbanization in very urban areas vis-a-vis or versus rural areas? So what are the areas that would deserve to be developed, and a threshold of concentration has been defined, a threshold to access services in terms of housing and in terms of public transport. So it's a global approach. Second tool that's been put in place is one that makes it possible to determine trajectories of land take. So it's not to have big targets by 2030 or 2050, but to say, where are we at now? at the scale of municipalities or of a given area. And that tool to calculate such trajectories is based on the trend, what has been done in the last 10 years, and to which extent can it be used to set targets in the long run. And I'm getting now to the action that the government wishes to launch, which should be implemented over the run of 2 tenures of 2 mandates. And the center of the action is to define the strategy for Wallonie, whereas what should happen is to implement that strategy and in a logic of subsidiarity. The thing is to mix up what is for Wallonie and the municipalities. So in the strategy, first tool is to review the land use plan that's just been adopted, to put in there the missing elements, with clear benchmarks, to have a clear definition of what's in, what's out, to give trajectories, and to make the action stemming from it more operational. Second point is to set benchmarks, so how and with which level of density and with which tools, and wondering about the tools, experts put in light that none of the tools used for the time being was adapted, was fit for that objective of no net land take. They were put in place in the 80s, 90s, and the aim was not fighting against land take at the time. So that has got to be reviewed, and the minister in charge of land use committed to that. Fourth point, which is a very important element at our level, is to be able to monitor ex post. Obviously, it is done more easily with statistical data, but we should monitor the action at all levels. And for that, we've got to have clear benchmarks to know from, well, what are the thresholds that can be defined. And we've got to address more operational approaches in relation to the history of Wallonie, its industrial history, among others. And the work of the next tenure is, once that toolbox is adapted, to allow municipalities to own it, and to the extent they do it, but give the possibilities to the region, if municipalities do not wish to do so, to substitute themselves to them. So this is the framework, well, the background. So the whistle hasn't been blown yet, but at least people are getting closer to starting blocks, and a decision should be made today and announced today about the launch of the review of the land use plan. I'm ready to answer your questions afterwards.
Okay, thanks, Michel, for this introduction. One small question from my side. We had 2-3 months ago also a meeting with planners from the Flemish area, the Brussels area, and the Walloon area. And then apparently there was some discussion that there are still lots of capacities for extending the urban in the countryside, in the legislative plans in the Walloon area, more than there's a need to. And there was a reluctance from the politicians to make it smaller. Doesn't that count, or isn't that the case? Can you briefly respond to that?
Donc chez nous, il existe encore l'équivalent de...
Well, we still have got the equivalent of about 50,000 hectares planned for urbanization, and that's not part of the basic centers that I talked about. So potentially 50,000 hectares that we do not need. So we could manage all of the urbanization within the centers that I mentioned earlier. The 50,000 hectares well present the difficulties that have been mentioned by my colleagues previously. That is, the owners of those 50,000 hectares know that they've got some value. They don't want that value to be reduced, and the local authorities that have got them as taxpayers and voters pay very much attention to them not being damaged. So it's a true problem for us. It's you know, the original sin in Wallonie, it was to have created that wealth in the 70s and 80s, and it's very difficult to basically solve this issue. We'll have to avoid that problem. We can't, you know, basically say no, those areas, the way they've been allocated, it's not the case anymore. No, we'll have to do it differently. We've got to say where we want to make developments. We've got to use operational tools that experts wish to have for the development of land use plans.
Okay, thank you for this answer. Then I would like to turn to Rene van der Lecq from the Flemish region, who also has to deal with this capacity problem and the Bouwshift. Rene, can I give you the floor?
Of course you can. Thanks a lot, Luc. And yeah, good morning on my behalf to everyone that has tuned in. I think Tristan already gave quite some information on the situation in Flanders. So in 2018, the Flemish government has set out the ambition to evolve from 6 hectares daily land take to in 2013 to no net land take in 2014. That was done in the strategic vision for spatial development. And yeah, this ambition now is to be realized by, on the one hand, stimulating densification and on densification, and on the other hand, discourage greenfield development. Already during the preparation of the strategic vision, some first measures have been taken. First of all, and I think this is very important, especially when I compare it with the phase Luxembourg is in right now. We have discussed, first of all, this paradigm shift from an everlasting land take as some kind of symbol for economic growth towards no net land take. And this has been this paradigm shift has been widely promoted and discussed. It was part of debates on national television, etc. I think this is important in order to have this broad societal discussion. Second, we started monitoring at a much more detailed level of this additional land take, much more detailed than the European Environmental Agency does. So what you can measure, you can communicate, you can follow it, you can monitor it. Very important thing that we have done. And third thing, we also made some already before 2018 some legislative modification. I want to point out some changes being made in Article 111 of our planning degree, which provides now that introduces now this idea of sustainable densification in the core of our planning law, in particular providing a basis for more sustainable regional project subsidies. But also some hindering laws on this densification in urbanized areas have been abolished. I give you as an example a general rule that was in place on maximizing the number of building levels in suburban neighborhoods. So this law has been abolished. Also, since the approval of the strategic vision, additional efforts have been undertaken. In particular, a platform for demonstrating and sharing good practices amongst has been established. And also a networking program for pilots have been set up to support local authorities and facilitating the encountering of implementation obstacles. And so this feedback from the ground that we get is a basis for making instrumental improvements, providing guidance, etc., etc. Of course, we are not there yet, although in the period from 2013 to 2020, we witnessed a slight decrease from 6 to 6 hectares daily land take. We don't know if this is due to the new policies, the measures taken. There is no evidence to support that. But yeah, as you already pointed out, Luc, Flanders is confronted with this severe policy dilemma, this impressive stock of unbuilt urban and industrial zones in our destination plans that were mostly made in the 70s and 80s. In total, this mounts up to almost 80,000 hectares, or almost 6% of the surface of Flanders. And yeah, this available stock makes it very hard to slow down land take. We have to be honest. And yeah, what we estimated was the cost for a complete buyout via planning compensation. But we estimate that this will cost 13 billion euros. And to be very honest, no political party in Flanders is prepared to put such an amount of money on the table in order to change something that is not directly visible on the ground. So this is a tough issue. Though being it not enough, possibilities for land take are already changing. Environmental law puts a ban on some permit delivery. Ban of permit delivery has been put on building permits in zones for risk of flooding. And in ongoing planning processes for natural and open space, we try to eliminate obvious part of this destination stock from the planning map. A partial buyout operation, as I lined out, is currently subject to political decision making. But yeah, this political debate is now ongoing for quite some years. Different political ideologies make it very hard to unravel this challenge. What open space is to be sustainably protected? How much money should be put on the table? Is compensation to be paid if there is no demand for building, or should we compensate if already law or environmental law already blocks permit delivery? Who will receive compensation? How much money seems to be justified, etc., etc. So you understand, this is politically seen quite a hard nut to crack. Of course, I'm happy having this policy decision on the table, having this discussion ongoing. At the same time, I'm a bit afraid and that this discussion distracts a little bit the debate from more pragmatic steps forwards. For instance, new zones for housing and industry can still be planned on the planning maps without any compensation elsewhere on the map. So I think this is, for me, this is something that, yeah, this is logic. It's a no-brainer. And you can even think of some kind of a rule obliging eliminating 2 hectares from the map if you plan somewhere else 1 hectare of new urban zoning. But also all kinds of possible measures that could change the playing field between densification, making densification more easy and making greenfield development more difficult. I think these changes are also not brought forward at this moment. You can, for instance, think of just making procedures for greenfield development, building permit delivery, make them longer, make them more difficult, add requirements, etc., and do the opposite for densification projects. Then the last thing I wish to address, this is also going forward to this period in 2030, how this system of a no-net land take planning could function. And this is a job from planners also inside, but also outside the government. I think also universities are to contribute to this. And my question is, and the question is, how can we create a functioning planning method and real estate market that constantly provides space for new activities and functions? We really have to rethink the idea of what supply of space can mean. Currently, we are using concepts we all know: reuse of space, mixed land use, temporary use of space. But the roads we are looking into at this moment are the possibilities of a three-dimensional planning. I think thinking in surfaces, if you think of supply of space, I think this brings out the wrong debate, especially it doesn't line out the possibilities for high-rise and underground development. And we are currently investing in 3D planning, both on a conceptual as a technical level. Yeah, of course, you have to put your space into from old-fashioned GIS into 3D models. So we are making steps in this direction, but also we try to address conceptual questions like how can we address destinations or property rights when you think in volumes. We have to also, that is the second line, we have to think, get more grip on what is leftover space. This is leftover space for me is a broad concept that may go from unused parcels due to bad urban design, via roofs without green or solar panels on it, to oversized office space that is underused. So we have to get more grip on this thing. And the third line, which we are exploring at this moment, is a strategy to anticipate for reuse of space. This means we know that new activities require space, but we also see trends that space will be given back, volumes will be given back to us. For instance, we know that in the forthcoming decades in Flanders, quite a number of industrial assets will become available simply because they will be written off. We know gas stations will disappear due to electric cars that will come. We also know that retail volumes will become available as e-commerce is growing. So we have to use this to have a clearer picture on this, and also knowing when volumes might disappear, that they can be reused, putting a strategy on that, being prepared, that we also can move fast when space comes available, that a good new purpose can be given to these purposes. So this is an overview of what we are doing at this moment. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Rene. I agree with you totally that next to perhaps political decisions, which is now still going on, we have to rethink our core of planners. I once called it that since the 1960s, planning is based on land use and property rights. Perhaps we have to rethink to something of user rights or something like that. I don't know, but that will take a big change. But nevertheless, I see also some discussions about nitrogen, for instance.
Like what?
Is nitrogen, stikstof, nitrogen. On those discussions that also make our drives to more space not restricted or something like that?
Sure. What we see is, yeah, over the last decades, all kinds of environmental regulations coming from the European level, or what we decided at the European level, to be very precise. They put boundaries on what is possible, and these boundaries, they are also being fought at in the courts. So this puts limits on the possibilities of further ongoing land take. Of course, the nitrogen question is an example. But also the importance being given by lawyers on habitat areas, bird directive areas. So we see that this there is a change happening here, which I see as a combination of European legislation, the fact that we can prove the damage on it, and lawyers using that argument in order to put boundaries on possible developments. And this is something we see in many, especially major projects at this moment in Flanders. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Rene. Now I will turn to Bob, Robert Wealer. Have you got any reactions on what Michel and Rene said? Please, Robert, take the floor.
Yes, thank you. Déjà, merci pour les deux présentations.
Well, first of all, big thanks for these two extremely interesting presentations that have shown that the situation in Belgium in general, in Walloon, as well as in Flanders, is very similar to ours. And the elements that has motivated us to a major extent is an element that Mr. van der Lecq has announced, described, which is a broad societal discussion, which is absolutely necessary. It's a must-do. And it is within this perspective that we've been carrying out within the development of the social planning program. We've been carried out a number of citizen engagement activities, not only to get the support of citizens or to the contrary, to really put environmental transition in their mind, to really have this awareness raising, as awareness is absolutely key. And the second part of this, the second aspect, which is the transition, falls under these aspects, because there's awareness raising via projects in, as relayed in the press, amongst other channels, and the teams have proposed tools for the implementation of the non-Atlantic, and the Luxembourg governmental policy can get its inspiration from these projects to develop its own strategies and orientations, and identified its own tools to implement the non-Atlantic. So, but I'd like to add, I must admit that the situation in Luxembourg is really unique, notably in terms of political system, in the sense that, you know, that in Luxembourg, the non-Luxembourg population are not entitled to, is not entitled to vote, and during the 6 to 10 years, after which they can be on the local voting list. So on the municipality level, they don't have any voting rights, and those with voting rights are the people in Luxembourg who, through, how should I put this, through inheritance, own the land, through inheritance right, and have way different interests than the non-Luxembourg population. And the system has hindered the implementation of the non-Atlantic, and hence it falls under the issue of the land ownership, which is at the center of discussions.
Yes, thank you. But what is the unique situation in Luxembourg, Robert? Can you explain a little bit more? What is so different from Flanders and the Walloon area in this case?
First of all, en fait, il y a deux différences.
Well, there are two main differences. First of all, processes are not that advanced because discussion in society has not taken place yet. And sometimes we're wondering how, and we are, to this point, how can we explain issues, challenges to people because we don't have the support of population. I mean, we haven't had this so far to implement such a policy. And the usual suspects, as we call them, the informed and enlightened public is well aware of this, but this is a minority of the population in Luxembourg. And this is one of the uniquenesses. And then land ownership is concentrated within the hands of Luxembourg people whose interest is very different to that of the non-Luxembourg population, which makes up half of the inhabitants of the country.
Yes, of course, you need to have support. And I think that Rene has said something about that. And that's a big issue. Nevertheless, perhaps you can learn from other regions which are perhaps more advanced, that you don't make the same mistakes.
Michel, puis-je ajouter un point dessus?
Yeah.
S'il vous plaît.
May I add one point on this? Because, yes, the situation, this is the system in Flanders, okay, that's different, I understand. However, there are some of the aspects that can be transposed. We're looking at, we looked at the voters or those eligible to vote in Flanders. Well, very suburban regions, 30% of the Belgian population, 30% of voters are people who live in suburban areas. And therefore, I believe that even 30% 30% is quite something, and really has to, has to be looked at. What did we do? We developed a strategy on densification in villages, and we've also started creating a strategy to make the suburban areas more sustainable. Especially, I think Tristan showed us a picture at the very start of our discussion where we have urban areas, and it is absolutely not advisable to foster densification in these areas. So we try to really address issues with these strategies that we've developed, these various groups within the population to reassure people. So we truly had the discussion, are you not going to develop large buildings in our small village? So we had to show pictures, we had to demonstrate how what we meant by densification in this context. It's really important to have a picture of the local voters, and to have the voters in mind, and to us to develop, when developing new strategies, targeting specific groups.
Okay. Michel, you want to come in here also?
Oui, sur la question de la participation.
Yes, on the issue of participation. We initiated, we launched a few initiatives looking at this transition towards this move to no-net land tech, which is, which might not be non-consensual transitions that are and move forward very swiftly, others not. Training, awareness raising, communication are absolutely key. This is absolutely a must do. We can't avoid doing it. And really, within the losers and the winners, most people think they're losers. Those the one that wins is the planet. So it's very difficult to strike the right balance between this individual interest against the general interest when it is so marked. It is the issue of individual landowners. It is about every individual's choice of life. And a few elements that were thrown in the discussions were what we call the arenas of the territories. This was as a form of participation, focusing on tensions, on addressing tensions between stakeholders or among stakeholders. And they are very significant tensions. We talk about densification, and it's about doing better, doing more, but doing better and smarter. And the voters want to protect their own living environment, and but other stakeholders have an interest for the planet to do better and to be healthier. So bringing together those who don't speak to each other and those who are really up against each other is something that we need to address. So this initiatives brought about many results, and the first statement, the first observation is that we agree with regards to the overarching aim, but this is a how to get there that spawns disagreement. We have to address various publics in very different ways. You don't talk to real estate developers in the same way as you talk to a notary citizen. And so we have to adapt our communication to every one of the levers. This is a long-standing approach in Walloon areas. We've been working on these for 3 decades, and we haven't managed to achieve any adapted tools by all stakeholders. But we launched public inquiries. We had many discussions within seminars, and this is just as much time dedicated to awareness raising. And this is a positive. This is positive. We didn't waste time.
Okay, thank you, Michel. I agree with you. You have to talk to the different kind of stakeholders in a different way. I also see in the chat some numbers from Jean-Marc Lambot. There's a pretty difference between the Walloon area and Luxembourg and Flanders over there, but I'm not sure if that is still the case. But nevertheless, to you all, I've got the feeling, hearing to Luxembourg presentations and you, Michel, that you have got the intention that you want to move this big question. It is a big question, a major paradigm shift, as Rene told us, that you want to move that to the big decisions towards the municipality or the lower level authorities. The same has been done in the Netherlands, and since 2013 it was not very well, has not a good effect, I think. But is that the case? Because I think that in Flanders it is still this question is still mainly the responsible from the Flemish level. But what are your ideas on that? On which level we should address this no net land take issue? Can I give you the word to you, Robert?
Yes, thank you. En fait, je ne pense pas.
In fact, I don't think we can limit ourselves to one echelon, one level. From a decision-making standpoint, national level, let's have its own level. In Luxembourg, we only have 2 levels: the national level and the municipality level, and the 2 must work in the same direction. That's why in my initial presentation, I insisted on the agreement between sectorial policies. So we need to draw or to pull the same string to make progress. That's not always the case in Luxembourg, which also is reflected in the spatial planning projects at the municipal scale. We have the national level and the sectoral policy linked and the relationship with the municipalities. And at the end of the day, municipalities have some municipal authority to them. And then we come back to the land ownership issue, which is a very difficult one to address. In my view, yes, all levels, in answer to the question, have to pull on the same string and define policies so as to implement the non-Atlantic.
Yes, possibly I could agree with you, but then, of course, there's the matter, what should you do then on which level? So what is then the responsible, the national level, what on the regional level, and what on the local level? Perhaps Rene has an answer to that, or?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. I also believe that there is a role for each planning level. But of course, the difficulty is there that in particular to this stock of unbuilt zones, the authority that changes the plan is the one that is to compensate. So in Flanders, the discussion really is who is to take up this burden. And as I see the discussion going at this moment, that is that indeed the Flemish government is willing to take at least a share of this burden. In particular, to some types of areas that you do not want to be developed. For the rest, it's also a matter that local authorities they have to play their role within their local planning, within their local planning, their local developments. I think, in particular, densification at measure that needs tailor-made densification. I think this can be best done by the local authorities. Of course, we have to stimulate that densification, as Tristan set out. Densification is not always that dense in Flanders, so we have to give here some of an impetus, but it is up to the local authority to decide what is appropriate to their local context. And I think here the role of the regional level should be, yeah, a little bit more restrained. But you see, there is a role of for all levels here, I believe.
Thanks. Michel, you've got thoughts on this?
Oui, que j'ai évoqué tout à l'heure, en fait.
As I stated earlier, there are two levels, in my view. I think in Wallonia as well, but I think the in terms of spatial planning development in the hands of the federal, state, and the region, and this has been broken down at the level of the municipalities. So the regions doesn't really know what its mission is. I think something that is absolutely compelling to me is about the mission is about the missions from the region is to set objectives and to set common objectives and common perspective. And then municipalities can manage the how. But I think this distribution of from general objectives, giving delegation of power to the municipalities for implementation purposes, that could be a way forward. But the region has never taken the role of the one setting objectives and making sure that these objectives are achieved. I'd like to come back to something that Rene stated earlier, talking about the 30 billion would need to be put on the table to you know, to have known Atlantic, because this is not something that is acceptable, can be heard by policymakers. We're putting in place policies that can't be seen. For elected members, elected politicians run so much risks. That's impossible. And on top of that, if the issue of the time for the action is no longer the issue, then everybody agrees. But it is about the time-bound action is absolutely key. And we saw the disasters of such spatial development policies in the summer of last year. And time is absolutely key from all the players at local and regional level. It's absolutely key to work on greening, as well as this issue of no net land take very quickly. Municipal plans have been putting plans very quickly, and the regions have been and the region has been putting plans, and this was no longer a problem with municipalities. We can work much faster, and this is what is happening. We do have flooding that here happens more and more often. And but when we talk about spatial planning, and we must, when it comes to spatial planning, and if we look at what has been going on over the past 5 years, we as spatial planners, we need to adapt our demand, and bear in mind that we can gradually be more daring, move into plants that we're not used to, usually with the issue of flooding. The matter of municipal autonomy has been key, but can be superseded when it comes, and we've seen that for what happened in the case of these flooding incidents of last year.
Yes, we all know. Okay, thanks for your answers. I'm now at the stage if there is still a takeaway message from each of the presenters or of the audience. Rene, do you have a takeaway message?
Yeah, maybe for me, the biggest lesson over the last years is don't present this transition towards zero land take as something black and white. Do things step by step. Be aware that you are into a transition. In Flanders, we have too much this discussion, like it's all or nothing. There is no problem at all of taking the step by step going forward. Be aware you are in a transition. You have one generation time. Take this time, and that might also change the political debates, which are very difficult.
Yeah. Okay. And Michel, do you have a takeaway message?
Non, j'ai donné les derniers
No, I
éléments.
think I've shared the latest update on my last contribution.
And Rob, do you want to say the final words?
Bon, je peux toujours essayer.
Well, I can give it a try. We've talked at length about the implementation of the non-Atlantic strategy in different countries. I think in my presentation at the start of it, I've illustrated the growth in Luxembourg and how it's distributed across the various countries beyond its borders. And coming back to that, for the greater Luxembourg region, this is the driving force of development. That's why development there is much more significant than in cross-border areas. But what this means that we need to consider the issue as the challenges in terms of spatial planning and in many other areas, as reflected in the recent health crisis. We need to transpose all these at the cross-border level, in the level of the functional region, as we try to do via the international consultation initiatives. But we can't implement by ourselves all alone. We need to do what needs to be done jointly with the neighboring countries at the level of the greater region, maybe. And hence the idea that came to us that in terms of the greater regions, part of the Interact projects that has come to fruition now, we wondered whether we should not apply themes to these policies on that international scale, on the greater regional scale. this is my closing comments.
Okay, thank you, Bob Wealer. Yeah, I'm pretty old already, so I still remember the Benelux structure scheme of 1988 and the second one in 1996, but there weren't any after that. Perhaps we should do a new one, but then in a bigger region. I don't